In 1999, a horror film made with a budget of less than $60,000 shocked the world, The Blair Witch Project. It pioneered the found footage style, making audiences feel as if they were experiencing real horror firsthand. Relying on psychological terror and the fear of the unknown, the film went on to gross over $240 million, becoming an iconic symbol of American horror. The story takes place in a small town in Maryland, where three film students decide to make a documentary about the Blair Witch. To them, the legend was just a local folktale blown out of proportion. Perfect for their graduation film, they carefully packed 2 days' worth of food and filming equipment, then drove off to the town of Blair. On the surface, the town appeared ordinary, but their research revealed a chilling history. In the 1940s, several children mysteriously disappeared here one after another. Decades passed with no bodies and no answers, only repeated tales of the Blair Witch and the eerie forest. Before venturing into the forest, they decided to interview the townspeople to uncover the truth behind the Blair Witch legend. However, the moment they mentioned her name, the residents' expressions changed instantly, revealing sheer terror. They sternly warned the three not to spend the night in the forest or to get anywhere near the house hidden deep within it. During the interviews, two residents mentioned a terrifying case that had left the entire town in fear. Years ago, a man had been accused of murdering several of the town's missing children.
What he did is he took the kids down in the basement by twos, and he made one face into the corner.
Really?
And then he would kill the other one. And then when he was done with that, he'd grab the one out of the corner and kill that one too.
Strangely, after his arrest, the man insisted he was only following the voices coming from the forest. This claim caused widespread panic at the time, and a woman named Mary even claimed to have seen the witch with her own eyes. The three immediately went to interview Mary, but her mental state was highly unstable. Her story was chaotic, full of contradictions, and her emotions were extremely erratic. Yet she kept repeating two things. The witch was covered in hair from head to toe, and they must never spend the night in the forest. To the three of them, it seemed more like a collective memory distorted by fear. The conflicting legends, combined with Mary's madness, convinced them even more that this was just a local myth that had been endlessly exaggerated. They joked about the townspeople's reactions, checked their gear, and eagerly planned tomorrow's filming. The next morning, they drove excitedly toward the forest, ready to track down any trace of the Blair Witch. As they went deeper into the forest, the terrain grew rougher, forcing them to abandon the car and continue on foot. Their first destination was a place called Coffin Rock. Rumored to have witnessed terrifying events years ago, 5 men had met a gruesome death there. When found, they were bound together, their bodies covered in mysterious symbols. But when the discoverers returned to report it, the bodies had mysteriously vanished, leaving only the stench of decay. By the time they reached Coffin Rock, darkness was falling, and a light rain had begun to drizzle. They decided to set up a tent and rest, since only Annie had brought one. All three had to squeeze inside for the night. The next morning, they continued toward their next destination, still joking and laughing. But after hiking for over an hour, they slowly began to realize something was wrong. The spot that should have been just 20 minutes away never appeared, and they had no idea when they lost their way in the forest. Mike grew increasingly agitated, angrily blaming Annie for taking the wrong path, while Josh quickly tried to calm him down. Annie quietly pulled out the map to check their route, but soon realized she couldn't pinpoint their location at all. Watching Mike fall apart, she nervously concealed the truth, claiming that as long as they kept going forward, they would reach it. Reassured by Annie, the helpless Mike reluctantly believed her, and the three pressed deeper into the forest. Fortunately, this time they found the right path, and after crossing a small creek, they arrived at a clearing. But seeing what lay ahead, a chill ran down their spines. Strange piles of stones were densely scattered across the ground and tangled in the branches. Annie immediately thought of the stones Mary had mentioned during the interview. This could very well be the legendary burial ground in the woods. Even more unsettling, the way the stones were arranged closely resembled some kind of religious ritual. Then Annie realized that the number of stone piles matched exactly the number of people who had gone missing over the years. Though it made them uneasy, the darkness forced them to set up camp here for the night. Hoping to capture more footage, they returned to the burial ground, only to find the stone piles had somehow been disturbed. Out of respect, Annie rearranged the stones, and just then footsteps echoed from the forest outside the burial ground. The three rushed out to investigate, but despite the footsteps circling them, they found nothing. After a tense night, Mike and Josh suspected someone was playing tricks on them and considered stopping the filming altogether. Seeing that both agreed to leave, Annie reluctantly accepted the decision. But the worsening weather pressed down on them, making it hard to breathe under the heavy sky. To escape the forest quickly, Annie led them down an unfamiliar path, hoping it would be a shortcut. Unfortunately, they once again found themselves hopelessly lost. They spent the entire day searching the forest, but never found the car they had left by the roadside. This meant they had to endure another night in this unsettling place. Every time he thought of the strange sounds at night, fear and anxiety tore at Mike from within. He began to scream in a hysterical breakdown, trying to release the panic and helplessness he had been holding inside. As night slowly fell, that chilling sound rose around them once more. Even though they mustered the courage to search carefully, they found nothing. Even more terrifying, the footsteps grew closer, as if some unseen presence had been watching them all along. Fear washed over them like a tide, and the three huddled uneasily in their tent, waiting for daylight. The next morning, eager to leave, they discovered 3 stone piles had appeared outside the tent, though they had no idea when. No one knew when the stones had appeared, or who had placed them there. Either way, it was clear they were not welcome. A wave of unease surged through them, and they decided to leave immediately. But fate played its hand again, and disaster struck them mercilessly once more. Annie suddenly realized the map was missing, and no one admitted to taking it. Fear, anger, and distrust spread through the group like a plague. They began angrily accusing each other, the tension mounting, and a strange, unsettling atmosphere enveloped the group. Determined to escape the terrifying forest, they pushed aside their quarrels and followed a creek, hoping it would lead them out. But as they were about to cross the creek, Mike suddenly stared at the water and laughed strangely. Before the others could react, he admitted he had kicked the map into the river, claiming it was useless anyway. Josh angrily lunged at him, wrestling, while Annie shouted at Mike in fury. After they had vented their emotions, the group's mood hit rock bottom. No one trusted each other anymore. Josh no longer trusted Annie's lead and demanded the compass, hoping to find their way out of the forest. But Annie refused to hand over the compass, insisting firmly that as long as they kept heading south, they would find their way out. After walking a short distance, Mike made a shocking discovery. The forest was filled with human-shaped dolls made of twigs. Seeing this, Annie and Josh quickly raised their cameras, capturing some footage before darkness fell. They continued trying to escape the forest, but even Mike's loud calls went unanswered. As night approached, the three had no choice but to camp in the forest for another night. Mike suggested not lighting a fire tonight, fearing whatever was out there might be drawn to it. Recalling that nothing had happened the first night without fire, the others agreed, even turning off their flashlights. But at midnight, strange sounds came again outside the tent, this time resembling children laughing and playing. Before they could react, the sounds seemed to try to force their way into the tent. Terrified, the three bolted from the tent into the woods, running until they finally hid in a patch of tall grass. After turning off all the lights, the three huddled tightly together, not daring to move until the sun rose. When they returned to the tent, they found their luggage rummaged through, and even the last of their drinking water was emptied. On the ground, there was strange slime and an unnerving symbol made of twigs. Seeing this horrifying scene, the three hurriedly packed their belongings, preparing to leave the eerie place immediately. Not long after, they came across a creek with a single log bridge, but it wasn't the one they had crossed earlier. The three had no choice but to continue forward, only to encounter another creek after several hours of walking. Josh ran frantically across, only to realize the bridge was identical to the previous one. They had returned to the starting point. This completely broke Josh, and he started angrily blaming Annie for bringing them into the forest. Her teammates' accusations pushed Annie to the edge as well, and she broke down crying, admitting her mistakes. Seeing this, Mike quickly intervened, calming them down and suggesting they rest nearby for the night and decide on the next move in the morning. Fortunately, nothing happened that night, and the three spent a rare, peaceful night. When Annie and Mike woke up, they realized Josh had disappeared at some point, and no matter how loudly they called, there was no response. Looking at Josh's abandoned backpack on the ground, Mike guessed that he might have gone out ahead to find a way. They decided to pack their things and wait for Josh before moving on. But they waited the entire morning and he never returned. Realizing Josh might have run into trouble, the two decided to proceed east according to their original plan. They called out Josh's name as they walked, and soon darkness fell again. So they set up camp wherever they could. That night, while talking together, a painful scream from Josh echoed from deep within the forest. Realizing Josh might be in danger, they rushed out to investigate, calling his name. As the cries gradually faded, Annie realized Josh might never return, and they had no choice but to retreat to the tent for the night. The next morning, a bundle of tied sticks appeared in front of the tent, bound with cloth from Josh's clothing. Annie forced herself to stay calm, and after soothing the distraught Mike, she untied the cloth alone. Inside the bundle, she found a pouch made from Josh's clothes. containing his teeth. The horrifying sight made Annie cry uncontrollably. She frantically washed her hands and kept the discovery from Mike. This made Annie realize their situation was extremely dangerous, and she hurriedly led Mike onward, trying to escape. By now, they had been in the forest for 5 days, with food and water long gone, and Mike had even eaten dry leaves. Despite walking all day, they still couldn't leave the forest, and even their camera was running low on battery. Annie recorded an apology video on the camera, full of guilt, apologizing to Josh, Mike, and her family.
I am so sorry. It is my fault. I insisted that we weren't lost. Everything had to be my way. And this is where we've ended up.
As Annie filmed, Josh's cries for help sounded from a distance again. Following the sound, they discovered a dilapidated house, and Josh's cries were coming from inside. They gritted their teeth and entered the house searching for Josh, combing the first floor, but found nothing. Extreme fear left them unsure of what to do. But soon they found a staircase leading to the second floor. As they debated whether to go upstairs, Josh's cries suddenly became clear from above. Mike charged up the stairs, shouting Josh's name, with Annie close behind him. After turning 2 flights, they froze in horror. The walls were covered in dark handprints of children. Despair and fear surrounded them like a tide. Yet even at the top floor, they could not find Josh, and Annie's sanity began to crumble. Then Mike realized Josh's cries were actually coming from the basement, and he rushed downward. He could no longer think of Annie behind him. He just wanted to find Josh and escape this terrifying place. As Josh's voice grew clearer, Annie's calls became faint, eventually turning into unearthly screams. But when he finally entered the basement, a mysterious force knocked him to the ground. Meanwhile, the panicked Annie screamed as she ran down the stairs into the basement. She then witnessed a bizarre scene. Josh was standing rigidly, facing the wall. Then Annie was struck by the same mysterious force and collapsed, motionless. The darkness of the forest had devoured not only their sense of direction, but also their humanity. Mike's discarded map and Annie's lies about being lost had become catalysts for their destruction. What began as a curious graduation project ultimately became a blood sacrifice to the legend.